Morning, everyone, ladies. Good morning. My name is Ani Karajian, and I'm happy to welcome you. I'm on the board and happy to see you this morning. I have the privilege of introducing you to Professor Linda Hill. Linda is at the business school. She's an awesome, awesome faculty member. And I'd like to just tell you 2 minutes about Linda. She's in your book, but let me just do it because I practiced. So Linda Hill is the Wallace Brent Donahan Professor of Business Administration at the Harvard Business School. She's a faculty chair of our leadership initiative and has chaired many of our executive education programs where we see some women, but not enough. We need more women. And she's also chaired the Young Presidents Organization as well as oversees the High Potential Leadership Program. She's the author of many books, including Being the Boss, 3 Imperatives of Becoming a Great Leader. She's going to talk to us about that. And Breakthrough Leadership, a program that helps organizations transform mid-level managers into more effective leaders at the top level. That's what we're focusing on this weekend. Breakthrough Leadership is the winner of the 2013 Brandon Hall Group Award for Best Advance in Unique Learning Technologies. So I want to know more about that, Linda. And it was included in the Wall Street Journal's one of 5 business books to read for your career. So we want to all come on in and hear what Linda has to say. And I'm happy to say Linda has good friends in the room. And let me just introduce you because I think there's nothing I could say that will do justice to your creativity, your leadership skills, and promoting women. Do that. Thank you, Linda. Okay, so now we're going back to
Whoops. We're not allowed to do that. That's one of the problems. Well, Ani is a dear friend. And Ani and I have had some wild times together, and if you ask me, I'll tell you privately about some of those wild times. And some of them have been in this part of the world, and others have been in Africa, and we're looking forward to some adventures other places. But as you all have come to understand, if you know Ani, not only is she unbelievably talented, she's unbelievably warm. And then on top of all of it, she had the nerve to ask me if I knew Catherine, who's going to be our lunch speaker. And one of the books that I've enjoyed writing, Collective Genius, in fact, Catherine was someone that I got to interview for that book. So I'm like, yes, I know Catherine, so may I stay for lunch? I am going to get to work, but I'm going to complain about Ani in front of you. I was just talking to some of my colleagues before I came over here, and they've been all invited to your gala, and I have not been. Okay, so let's just be clear. Do you see this? I have to work, but I don't get to drink, okay? And have fun. So that's the way it works, Ani, so we're going to deal with this later. But anyway, what I would like to talk with you about today, because Catherine knows a lot more about how you build innovative organizations because she lives in one than I do, and Pixar for me has been just really a wonderful place to be, and I've learned so much from Catherine and her colleagues, and she will talk about a lot of those things. What I want to do is talk with you about the ideas in being the boss. And I put it up here, this title, not because I want you to buy the book, because I don't care if you buy the book, but I want you to think about being the boss. And we really actually named the book Being the Boss intentionally. One is because when it got translated into different languages, as we hoped, everybody knows what a boss is. The word leadership means different things to different people. But really more seriously, we all do know what a boss is. And we all do know how a boss, and having the right boss, can make such a difference to our lives. And we wanted to remind people that when you get to be the boss, not only do you have certain rights and privileges that come with that, but there are also duties and obligations. And they matter a lot. And it's particularly nice for me to be here with a group of women and from a part of the world that has had its challenges and probably will continue to have its challenges, because I became a business professor because I'm interested in economic development. And how do we all gain power so that we can really improve our lives and livelihoods? So that's what actually gets me going every day. And I want to just talk with you a little bit about the work. And I have collaborators, and I want to be clear about that. So if I say I'm being a very bad person. So what I first want to do is talk with you about some research we did to try to understand what does it take to be a high potential today and what did it take 10 years ago. So we went around the world and we asked C-suite executives that very question. So who are the high potentials in your organization? Why do you consider them high potential? Who do they used to be? And that's what I want to base this conversation on, and that's what this particular research was all about. So what we heard from these C-suite executives is that if you had been, or if you were a value creator 10 years ago, you could be a high potential. But today, it's not enough to simply be a value creator. You must also be able to be a game changer if you want to be seen as a high potential. And let me just describe what I mean by that language. A value creator is someone who knows how to identify and close what is referred to as a performance gap. A game changer is someone who knows how to identify and close what is referred to as an opportunity gap. So a performance gap is a gap between where you are now and where you should be. An opportunity gap is a gap between where you are now and where you could be. And what we see is organizations need more people who know how to deal with the coulds and not just the shoulds. And the reason is because we know we live in a very dynamic environment, and we always need to be able to adapt our organizations. And it's not just about the top doing it, it's about everyone in the organization being able to think about this. So to give you an example of what I mean by this, one of the companies we've been studying for a long time is a company called HCL Technologies. HCL Technologies is an Indian outsourcing company. That's actually a little bit simplistic, but fundamentally they were the company that actually introduced created initially the technology industry in India. When IBM and others left because the government had policies that they thought would not allow them to protect their IP, Indian companies began to get into this space. And the first one was a company called HCL Technologies. By the time we met them, however, they were number 5 in the industry, even though they were growing at 35%. So imagine, for those of you who are in businesses, wouldn't you like to grow like that, but you're number 5. And if you're an outsourcer, as the CEO said, and you're number 5, you're about to become irrelevant, because who's going to go to their C-suite and say, we should really work with number 6? They're not going to do that. So he did a very, very radical set of things. And one of the things he did, and I'm telling you this sort of set this up, is he said, we need to turn over the growth of this company to the youth, because this is a very young country with lots of young people. And guess what? They're not necessarily that well educated. But we want to be world class, and I'm not going to tell you his whole story, but fundamentally what he said to them is, you know what, young people, and this is the other piece that I will add to it. He said, one of the problems we're going to have, Linda, is that what you learn in India is the person who gets the A in school is the person who repeats best what the teacher has dictated. And if you've been educated that way, dictate, repeat, that doesn't lead you to show initiative, use your judgment, to understand that you're supposed to dream, figure out what those opportunity gaps are, and then, of course, not just dream, but figure out how to do something about those dreams. So one of the things that led me to find myself studying Pixar, for instance, is that to close opportunity gaps, you do have to execute, but usually you have to be able to lead change, or you have to be able to lead innovation. And Pixar is a place that does that, and a number of other organizations we looked at around the world. I study innovation and globalization. We see that, in fact, we need to all figure out how to do this no matter where we are in the organization. And that means that leadership has always been hard, but it's actually getting harder. More is actually expected of us because, in fact, it's harder to be successful, whether it's a business, a not-for-profit, or a government. So with this framework of understanding that, one of the things I'd like for you to be thinking about as we're kind of going through our conversation is how much time, if you're in that kind of role, are you spending on opportunity gaps? And frankly, I heard the conversation about, some of us work outside the home and some of us don't. You have dreams for your family too. You have dreams about the opportunity gaps in your own family life and organizations you work with like this one. So whatever world you want to think about, what are those dreams? If only we could do this. Boy, would it be exciting, would it change the world, whatever it might be. And how much time do you actually get to spend on those things? Now, I'm an academic, and I'm supposed to have a lot of time to spend on these things. And Adi knows, it's in the restroom, right? Quick. Armenian, I'm going to do this. Linda, come, you got to be there, right? We do it real fast because we know how that all works. But one of the things you want to figure out is how much time are you actually spending on these opportunity gaps? Because the other dilemma is if you don't work on these sorts of things, you don't develop the kinds of mindset, skills, tolerance for risk, et cetera, resiliency that's required to close them. So with that in mind, Kent and I began to think about how can we think about leadership and talk about leadership. And part of the reason, there are lots of different models of leadership, and I don't think we need to be able to create more. But the problem, I'll just tell you very quickly, because I know Catherine's going to be speaking to you, is that leading change is actually different from leading innovation. So for many of you who've learned about leadership, and it's a very important distinction, and I think he's actually sitting in his office upstairs, between leadership and management, someone like John Cotter, that we have to be able to deal with change and deal with complexity. But turns out innovation is a different story than some of that. So we had to come up with a way of talking about leadership that would allow you to, is it about execution? Is it about change? Is it about innovation? And we ended up coming up with this idea of these 3 imperatives. So the first imperative is you have to manage yourself. No matter what definition of leadership you have, you're going to always be the instrument. And you're trying to use yourself as an instrument to get things done. And at the very least, you want to be able to match your intent with your impact. That's the deal. So that's important to do, and that's at the heart of all leadership. And also the other thing about leadership is always about an emotional connection. So it's about you managing yourself to get that done, building that connection that you need to build. The second imperative of leadership is managing your network. This apparently is one that's more complex for women, so in our time together, I'm going to talk about these 2. But managing your network is really about managing relationships with people over whom you have no formal authority, but you're deeply dependent on to get your job done. And many, many people don't think about this as being about leadership. They think about it as being about politics. And I want you to think about it as being about politics and being about leadership. It's deeply about leadership. And we'll talk about a couple of things about that one. And this is a piece of the puzzle that actually is more complex for a range of reasons for women. And the last one is about managing your team. And this is about dealing with those people so that you can have influence over the people who actually report to you, over whom you actually do. You are the boss. You do have formal authority. I'm not going to say that much about this piece of the puzzle because we want to have some time for some questions. But the first 2, and we made that the last one, not because it's the least important, but because you'll all think about it. If I asked you what definition of leadership you have, you'll all think about the people who report to you. That would happen. Whether you'll look into yourself, whether you'll think about that network, there's some variations about that. And these are all deeply interdependent. So if you do not develop your team, you cannot leverage yourself. And you'll have no time to manage the network. You'll have no time to manage yourself. You'll have no time to manage your family, right? As I say when I was trying to get my 14-year-old out of the house today. But anyway, I can't manage him at all. The other day, right? Actually, the other day he said, "Mom, I think you're micromanaging me." And I'm like, whoa. Problem here. What do you mean micromanaging you, right? Anyhow, what have you been reading? Where have you been? Anyway, so these are all, if you don't manage your network, just to say this what happens there is you're not going to be aligned with your organization, and you're also not going to have the resources necessary for your team to be effective. Fundamentally, you will be powerless. And one of the problems with being powerless, if any one of you have worked for a powerless boss, that's a yucky experience, right? You have a sense of gaps that you'd like to close and no capacity to get it done. And no one wants to work for a powerless boss. The other thing is there's a fair amount of research that says if you're powerless, you cannot give voice to your values. And this whole issue of being authentic is a very important one. And also it leads to people behaving, powerlessness is corrupting. So for sure, there's lots of reasons why you want that to be right. And then if you can't take care of yourself, then as I'm now gaining weight, my Fitbit is on, but I walked over quickly and I jumped around. So anyhow, I still need to do something about that one. So these are the 3 imperatives of leadership and exactly what you need to be doing with regard to the team piece, if it's execution or change or innovation. There are different kinds of issues, different challenges, different things you need to think about, but these are the 3. So am I speaking too quickly? Okay. I just was teaching a class that's very global, and I'm happy here I can speak fast. Anyway, so in terms of managing yourself, the 2 questions I'd like for you to think about with regard to this one is how do people experience you, and how do people experience themselves when they're with you? This, again, is the emotional connection. And if you want people to be engaged, you can think about the kinds of words. How do you want people to experience you? How do you want them to experience themselves when they're with you? And so that's the piece of the puzzle that we want to really think through, and I'll come back to this a lot. No matter what that experience is, you fundamentally want people to trust you. You want people to feel that Linda trusts us, or me, and I trust Linda. And trust is the grease, the glue that allows humans to interact. And part of the puzzle we face is that we live in a world that actually needs us to learn how to trust people in very different contexts than Mother Nature ever thought of when she created our nature, right? And how we think about trust. But this is really what you want. You want people to feel that. So one of the challenges, of course, of this little 14-year-old who told me I'm micromanaging him is that implies that I don't trust him. Of course, this is the truth. But anyway, I do want him to feel that his mother trusts him. But anyway, we're going to talk about the truth and the reality and the perception of these situations. But you want people to feel that. So one piece of it is to keep in mind that the reality does really matter about whether someone's trustworthy. That's one of the things I heard you all talking a little bit about the election. Reality does matter, but certainly so does perception. And the question is, what evidence do people have to know that you're trustworthy? And they're looking for evidence about your competence, which we all know, particularly if we're at work, but they're also looking for evidence about your character. And frankly, the more senior you become, the more they worry about the character piece. Partly because they know good and well that you're not going to be competent about everything. The world's too complex, scope, scale, right? They also know that you're going to have to always be learning and developing, but they know you're going to be making, even if you're competent, you're going to be using your judgment, you're going to be dealing with trade-offs. So our parents taught us always maintain your character, make sure people never feel that that's not right, because you can't fix that very much. It's easier actually to fix competence than it is character when you have a problem there. But in terms of character, people pay attention to that and are looking for evidence about what your intentions are. Are you well-intended? Are you trying to do the right thing? In terms of your competence, do you know what the right thing to do is? And so you always want to be thinking about, you want people to feel that you're trustworthy and that you trust them. So one of the challenges really, in all honesty, for those of you who are producer leaders, and for those of you who have a high need for achievement, when you see a problem and you step in, you're doing it, for very good reason maybe, but people may interpret that as micromanaging, not trusting, all these unintended consequences. So at the heart of all we're talking about is how do I improve? And actually people who are smart and people who are superstars actually have more trouble with this and learning to lead. So you can either be not so smart and not such a superstar, and then maybe more people will trust you in interesting ways, but actually there is evidence that you're because you're good yourself, if you're not careful, people who are around you won't experience themselves as being very good. They'll always experience themselves as being second best or whatever that might be. And that actually is something you have to manage that we could talk a lot about. But I want to turn to this network piece. So the network piece is about managing those relationships with people over whom you have no formal authority, but you're dependent on. And here, as I said, it's a particularly complex, it's a complex area for everyone. In fact, for my co-author, we argued a lot about these chapters because he hates politics. So many people will say to me, I just do my job, I don't do politics. Or, I think politics are dirty. There's a colleague, Tiziana Cacharo, who used to be with us, who's now at Toronto, who's done research that shows that women really do think they're more likely to see this as dirty. And when we see things as dirty, we obviously don't do a very good job of it. It may be okay that you're ambivalent about it, but what she finds is if you actually feel that way about it, you actually end up, your career doesn't work so well. And more equally as important and more important to her is that your team suffers, because that's what she's been looking at, not just what happens to you, but what happens to your team. And what we need to know is that all organizations are inherently political, because there are three primary sources of political conflict in organizations: diversity, interdependence, and competition for scarce resources. Those are the three primary reasons why we see political conflict. There's diversity, there's all kinds of diversity, not just demographic, markets you're serving, products, whatever it is. There's interdependence. There's actually more interdependence in organizations when you're trying to build a brand. If you want to have a common brand experience, there's interdependence because everybody has to do certain things alike so that the customer has a similar experience. Many of you are probably in organizations that are putting in place more shared services because you're trying to build a platform so you can execute, or you're trying to control costs. So interdependence is up. And thanks to the economy, there's more competition for scarce resources, right? So going back to what I was saying to you, and I didn't finish that quite story about the opportunity gaps and the performance gaps. So this company's number 5. They got to do something about it. They have a young demographic. They're not necessarily all that well educated, or they're educated with this dictate, repeat. And one of the things he said to them was, in thinking about this, and the network piece becomes a part of it, he wanted everyone in the organization, obviously all these individuals, young people have to manage themselves, etc. It was a 5-year culture change, but he also wanted them to all understand that, you know what, let me tell you who you're dependent on. Even though you're a 25-year-old, quite dependent on the client. and you're trying to build a partnership and you want the client to trust you. And he turned it into interpersonal kind of language, although that's a little tricky. But this is what you're supposed to think about. You're building relationships when you're an outsourcer. You're down there with the client. You got to build these relationships. And they talked a lot with people about that. And you need to understand what's going on with that client. And what he wanted them to do, and what they now do, is he wanted them to be able to go, quote, beyond the contract. And what he meant by going beyond the contract is we have a contract when we're an outsourcer, and we can have no performance gaps, right? We said we should do this. We made that promise. We need to deliver on that promise. But if we want to build strong relationships where we're trusted, we have to go beyond the contract. We need to do those coulds. And you can only do those coulds if you truly understand who you're trying to build this relationship with. So they educated them about what was going on with the client, and you need to invest your time and energy to know about your particular client so that you can build mutual trust. Again, this is interpersonal about something with a whole other company, but that was language that these young people could understand. So in that network, as you're thinking about who you're dependent on, not just internal parties, but lots of external parties that you may be dependent on to get your job done. And wanted them to all have that mindset because we need to go beyond the contract. Just in case I forget, the bottom line of that story is I'm writing up something now about a 25-year-old, there are not more than many of them, who came up with a $15 million idea for the client. So by saying a whole culture change, a whole lot of stuff happening, and that's not all that unusual in the organization, but seeing that if everybody's thinking this way, building trust, he talked to them about how do you build relationships. You're not just fixing something for the, entering data, whatever. You're dependent on them, their relationships, they have problems, competition for scarce resources on their end as well. Let's think about how we build trust internally and externally. So think about this network very broadly when you're thinking about it. It's not just the people who are internal to the organization. So there are lots of people you're dependent on to get your job done. And it actually is helpful to draw a picture like this, or some picture where you really think about who are those dependencies, inside, outside, junior, senior. And then there are three kinds of networks. Do I have 10 more minutes? I don't know when we started. I want to talk about three kinds of networks you want to think about building. And this dependency one is the reality, like of who are you dependent on. And you always want to overestimate dependencies as opposed to underestimate, because you don't want to leave somebody out who's really critical. So in my situation, and I'm very dependent on the IT department, right? I'm usually not aware of that until there's a problem. For those of you who, I'm suddenly quite aware, right? So these are second order of the problem. And you want to, again, you should treat everyone, you need to treat people and build relationships where there's trust there too. And obviously not just yell at them or something, because I don't. I know them. I'm not particularly a yeller. But when I tell you about better to really think about who are we dependent on and how do you think about building relationships with those groups. Now, one of the best ways to improve your own reputation and trust in a company or organization is to make sure that you understand some people are more dependent on you than you are on them, right? You're big time in their network and they're little, or maybe you just have a lot more power over them or whatever it is because of the way. How you treat those people, everybody sees. Everybody knows. It relates to, again, that feeling of evidence about whether you're trying to do what's best for the enterprise. So the three kinds of networks I want you to think about building, and I also want to, one of my colleagues, Herminia Ibarra, who's at INSEAD, does a lot of work on women in these issues in particular that I highly recommend. But the first kind of network, and I'm going to give you some of the jargon, the network field is full of jargon, and I apologize to the economists because it was started by the economists in part, and they like jargon, they like precision. So anyway, the first thing though is what you want to think about is, do I have a strategic network? And is it effective? The strategic network is the network you use to figure out what are the gaps, and perhaps more importantly, how do I prioritize them? Because you can't work on all of them, right? And the only way you can answer this is by networking. You need to be able to give yourself a 5 on these two questions. Let me let you read these two questions. So no matter how much reading you do of your intranet at work, or whatever books you want to read that the Harvard Business Review that we write, that will not help you get a 5 on. It'll move you, maybe you can get a 3, who knows? But it's really conversation. So often when we think about networking, we forget that it's only by talking to the right people, having a conversation with those people that you can actually know what matters in your company. You can't read it anywhere, right? Really. It's conversation. That's networking. How do I network? Who do I need to be talking to? Who am I dependent on in conversation? Who do I want to be able to say? You want it to be two-way, but who do I want to talk to so I can shape our understanding of priorities? So that's networking. And you want to have a 5 on both of these, ideally. And actually, if you are the boss and you don't know the first one, your team is at a horrible disadvantage because you might be working on the wrong things, or you don't know what the constraints are in the organization. The second one, if you want to be seen as competent, they need to know if that's your area of responsibility, you know the latest and greatest. This is what's happening in our world, in my piece. When they want to come to you, not hear about what was happening 2 years ago, they want to know what's happening now in your particular area of responsibility. And again, you can only learn that from conversation. So I sit on the board of a bank. I probably shouldn't say that, but I'm Elizabeth Warren, probably, my buddy who was down the way at the law school, probably she's upset with us. But anyway, one of the things is if those bankers are not, have on their suits and are golfing with their buddies and they're not spending time in Silicon Valley, that is a problem for me as a board member because of where innovation is going to come from and where disruption is going to come in the industry that they're in. So they need to change their network, right? And we actually ask the CEO, like, where did you hang out last weekend and with whom, right? This is an issue. So that's what a strategic network is about. And when you look at people who have very healthy networks that are strategic networks, they're very outward focused, like this kind of meeting allows you to learn things. They're full of diversity because you don't want to simply talk to your friends. So you've got to get different perspectives. So you want diverse points of view and you need to have relationships. Information is power. Information can't be understood unless you know that person's point of view. Are they an exaggerator? How do I really interpret what they're saying? So you want diverse points of view. Ndidi, some of our Africa work. Yes, we worked in Africa together, so I stuck in, so we can be reminded of her. Yes, Ndidi's there. So anyway, she has an unbelievable network, actually, very entrepreneurial. The second kind of network you need to build is your operational network. This is the network you build to actually close the gaps. Now, for that first network, because there's so many relationships, there's lots more we could say about that. A lot of those relationships aren't very strong necessarily, right? There's just too many that you're sort of reaching out. But you've got to be careful because the stronger the relationship, the more reciprocity is assumed. But some of those are weak ties, as they're called. But for the operational network, these are the people you're going to go to and say, would you help me close this opportunity gap? And in an organization, even a simple change, you often need a coalition. You just can't get anything done by yourself. So this looks different, this operational network. And you really do want to care about the strength of the relationships. I'm not going to help you close an opportunity gap when I have all my own performance gaps if I don't trust you. And if I don't know what I can expect from you, if I don't think I can influence you, that would be irrational. So this network looks different, and it actually looks like more cohesive because you want to introduce your friends to your friends so you can quickly build these coalitions. Because often people say, there was an opportunity gap, we've known it for a long time, it's just like climbing Mount Everest, though, because I don't have the relationships, or we're not connected to these people. So ideally, you want to build these relationships before you need them in a way, so that when you go to ask for the big favor, they already know who you are, they have some sense of who you are, because people like to have firsthand evidence of trust, not just reputation. So this one looks different. So who you want to be is Sue in this picture. Sue is a broker. She's a bridger. And what we see is people's careers, particularly today, the people who are the brokers and the bridgers are the people who are actually reaping the most benefit, or whatever you want to call it, rewards from the organization. And the problem for Tarun is he may be on the cutting edge, but he has no coalition. Sue has different worlds where she's getting information. Jens may be okay because they're both in this coalition or this operational network, but Jens is highly dependent on Sue. So if Sue's wrong, Jens is probably going to be wrong. Or if Sue gets promoted, suddenly Jens discovers I was over-dependent on one person to help me understand what was going on around here, right? Which is why you want to think about where are you actually going to get these insights. So these are real pictures, and I'm only going to just show you a couple things. So this is one executive's network. He has a pretty good strategic network, and there is some coalition there. Here's another one. And I'm going to show you all this one. This is a real one. I'm stereotyping horribly, okay, now. So I'm an African American, just so you all know that. Actually born in West Virginia. I'm frequently asked where, like right here, like a regular old American. Anyway, it's people ask me when I get in a taxi. But I draw this because in the African American community, in some ways it's very dense. We're very connected to each other, right? And when I would visit my grandmother, I was safe because she would know before, I knew that I had done something wrong, because it does take a village to actually take care of you. And I suspect the Armenian community, at least when I'm in Watertown, I see what the story is, right? Now, there's a lot positive about this because you do feel supported. The negative is you're afraid to take risks because everybody will know immediately. So one of the things we actually see is that people who are embedded in these very dense networks can be somewhat risk averse. And particularly if you're an extended family where it doesn't only reflect on you, it reflects on your cousins and your uncle and da-da-da. That's the way my community works, right? I have 81 first and second cousins in Detroit, Michigan, right? I don't need a village. I just have my family, right? My son but this density gives you support. There are people you can go to get resources, etc. But there's also, in that, you want to make sure that you can breathe, that you have some sense of. The other thing is you don't get new information. It's kind of redundant, right? So again, I'm just picking on that one. Here's one that looks like the Sioux, a broker one. But the last network I want you to think about building, and then let's move managing your boss. I put some. You can turn this into a PDF and give it to people. Yeah, I just want to talk about one last network, and this is the developmental network. So you have your strategic network to figure out the gaps and prioritize them, the operational one to deal with them, close them. Then there's your so-called developmental network. But before I say that, I want to just describe this ugly picture. So you want to work in an organization where there's a very good fit between your values and the values of the organization, because again, you can be authentic. That makes it easier. And you want a good fit, but you want to go work in an organization that there's not a perfect fit between what you know and what you get to do. You want people to bet on your potential, right? A little bit of learning. You want to stretch assignment. You also want to work with people that you respect and like and you think you can learn from. Then when you're in the organization for a while, you get some expertise. Expertise is the source of power you primarily want to rely on when you're trying to influence people. You actually know what you're talking about, right? So that's the source of power, not being a boss or whatever, and it only comes from working with people in an organization. So actually, people are not as portable as people think, because even though you had exactly the same job at another organization, the expertise you need would be a little different. So moving, across organizations, it can be tricky until you get that expertise, then you deliver something, then you develop a track record, you become credible. Credibility is usually a little broader concept than trust. It's trust plus influence. So people can want to do the right thing, know what the right thing to do is, but they can't get it done. So over time, you like them, whatever, but you don't want to work for them because they're not credible. But you want to build credibility, you get a bigger stretch assignment, your network grows, you become the broker, you're in the center, ideally, and you get more expertise, and then you start to get more formal authority. The thing that we want to pay attention to is, what is a stretch assignment? A stretch assignment has three qualities. One is you're working on something relevant. Relevant today or relevant tomorrow. Doesn't matter, but it's relevant. The second is you have some autonomy, so you can actually play out your opportunity gaps, right, or your performance gaps even. And the final is you need some visibility, and this also becomes tricky for women. So visibility, in a way, it's tricky to do, right, but if people don't know you did it, then you're not going to get the credibility kick, that evidence. And one of the most important roles I always tell leaders is to make sure that everybody really understands who did what, who really should get credit. So that's how organizations become politicized in the ugly way. The wrong people don't really know, right? Women, and there's some research that an article 2 months or so ago in the Harvard Business Review about how women often are the ones who are doing all the behind the scenes work to get the collaborations going, and they get no credit for it. They don't, right? That's what, it's actually a really neat article that everyone should read. And it's about women tend to be more likely to fall into that because we're going to make sure that gap gets closed, right? We're doers. So the last thing I want to say about this is the following. If you don't get to work, what this is really telling us is that working and learning are one and the same thing to some extent. And if you don't get to work on something, then you cannot learn it. So what you know is based on what you get to do. So if you don't get to work on that which is relevant to the organization's success, you don't get a chance to develop the expertise that is deeply valued. And therefore, when they go to find a woman to move up, or whatever it is, they say, we don't have one. Well, she has been de-skilled because she has not been able to work on those things that are really critical to the organization's success. So you need to, going back to that strategic network, as you're understanding what's unfolding in the world, you need to be thinking about what's really relevant. Who do I need so that I can figure out that these are the opportunities I need to have so I can learn these things. I don't mean it in a tit for tat kind of way. I'm not going to do it because it's not really relevant. That just gets on one's nerves. I must say, when people tell me that, it's like, that's fine. But anyway, we all have to do our contribution. But I think, again, if you're understanding where the world's going and you want, this assignment may not look so interesting to some people, like when Ani and I went to Africa, right? No storytelling. Anyway, but when we went there, that was not the market that people were interested in, et cetera. Right after apartheid ended, yep. And it's worked out well for both of us in terms of our relationships. I had a surprise day visit with Nelson Mandela, and so that was worth it. That was good, right? Years later, so we were willing to go, even though no one wanted to go. That's not the big market. We thought it's relevant. Africa will matter someday to someone. Guess what? It is there, right? So based on your own values, you might decide something is relevant to work on. This is going to come. It takes a long time to develop expertise. And you want to be T-shaped. You want to be very deep about something. It takes a long time, and you want to be broad across the top. So what you get to do will determine what you know. And what you know will be based on who you know. What you get to do will be based on who you know, right? If I got that right. So this is the last network that I want you to think about, and that is your developmental network. You need to build a set of relationships with people and refresh it periodically of people who will help you get access and learn from those experiences you have so that you can say de-skilled. You can avoid being de-skilled. You can say skilled and therefore be trusted because you actually are competent. And this is about managing yourself. So when you're taking care of yourself and building your own personal board of directors, which needs to have some variation on it, you're actually managing yourself, which means you'll be trusted and trustworthy. And that's very key to dealing with your network or dealing with your team. So does that all make sense? That was quick and dirty, and I know we're hungry. So do we have any time for questions? I was playing, yes. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you. Great job. I had some questions about office politics. It's an area, like you said earlier, that we don't excel in as women. So any advice or any would be appreciated.
I was giving you a broad framework. One thing is, I think to see it, it's about helping you become powerful so that you can get things done that you want to get done. So the mindset one needs to have about it is fundamentally, you're trying to make sure that you have the influence you need, and the source of power you want to rely on mostly is expertise. Now, I will say, and I'm going to be a little careful about this. Why am I being, anyway. No. So what I was going to say is that doesn't mean that you don't want to be taken advantage of because of the political situation. So since you're less likely to get credit, for instance, as this article described, those people who are often in the back doing the collaboration, you do need to figure out ways that feel comfortable for you, if when you're not getting credit, to point out to people or make sure that people do understand what your contribution has been. And those can be complicated conversations, and you have to do it properly because a woman does get punished for doing things in this area that a man doesn't, you're supposed to do. So one of my, I don't know, I missed the first panel, but one of a professor, I think out at Stanford, actually advised companies, for instance, if they want to get more women into the pipeline, have the interview be 15 minutes longer. I think it was 15 minutes. Don't hold me to this. Because women will take longer before they're going to tell you their accomplishments. So what they found is if the interview was a half an hour, or whatever it was, the men had laid them all out. And, the women, it wasn't until minute 31 when there was a little bit of a relationship built where they began to say about things they accomplished. So the way they increased the pipeline was make it a little longer, because then you will begin to hear, women will feel like and if they kind of told you faster, you might have actually felt negatively about them. That's one of the dilemmas about it, which is why they just made them longer. So, but the other thing I would say is if you have, and this is the part that I was thinking about, if you have a bully in your life, and sometimes people think you're less powerful, maybe you are because of women or something, because you're in the minority, you do have to deal with bullies. Okay, otherwise bullies will continue to bully you. And the one bullying story, the only reason, and we'll keep this in Las Vegas here, because I think only Ani will know who I mean. So I'm going to give you two bullying stories and how I dealt with them myself in these politics. And it's partly because, again, people don't think you're so powerful. One was, I was a junior professor, and there was a senior professor who's very, very prominent, very, very senior in magazines, et cetera. And I was on a task force with her, and she was running it. And I could tell from her nonverbals that she was not happy with me. I thought, okay, so I thought, let me go talk with her and, say, what could I be doing better or what's happening? So she said, the only thing you could do, Linda, is never speak again. This is what you call very straightforward, right? So I thought, well, that's interesting. And I said, okay. She said, because every time you speak, people do what you want and not what I want. This is lucky because it's not passive aggressive. Like, it is out there, right? Now, she's very senior to me, and I have to say, this is not good behavior, just to be clear, but I thought to myself, oh, how could she really have been threatened by me? Or what is this about? This is craziness. But she said, I've never been able to, I have to prove to people that I can lead, and I need to have my ideas get adopted. This is the first time I've been given this kind of assignment, and I need you to let me, prove this, do my job. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, you have bad judgment. Now, one of the things that, no, she did about the issue. No, about the issue, as I thought about it, but the first thing, she did a favor, she gave me a gift. I hadn't noticed that we were doing what I thought. But she was right, and I was the only junior one there. And I thought, well, that's a gift. I'm trying to be positive, glass is half full. So I said, okay, so you know what? Let me come see you 15 minutes before the meeting and tell me what you're going to say. And she did. And then I would tell her what I thought about it, and she'd fix it. She never gave me any credit in the meeting, because I really focused on what's best for the Harvard Business School. Let's just, this is, okay, she's got her issue here. So we did that. And the task force was successful and all of that. So a number of years later, she said something to me once like, thank you. But then a year later, this is office politics, and she needed to do that with her. But then a few years later, one of my junior people, I'm senior, it wasn't about me being junior or senior, I was actually trying to understand what are the pressures. I underestimated that she could feel pressured. And I'm only telling this example because I'm going to come back to gender and how this plays in this. But what happened was, one of my junior people ended up on a task force with her. So I knocked on her door and paid her a visit and closed the door. Let me just be clear. If you mess with him, you're messing with me. And we know that you can mess with people, don't we? Right? So I just wanted to, because I don't want her messing with my team, right? So you can mess with me, I can manage how this is, but I'm not going to set my junior colleague up in a situation where they're going to get messed with. And I just told her, you mess with them, you're messing with me. And if you want to mess with me, I will come. We both know there's no need for us to act like you don't do this. So I think there are times, and the thing that's tricky, and I don't think this could have been a part of the dynamic, but for women, one of the dynamics that you have to worry about is sometimes there are systemic reasons why women will look like they're more in competition, or only one woman is going to win, right? I was so junior to her, I think that, anyway, but that doesn't mean that wasn't her perception about how this would play. And that's not just her, that's the organization, seeing that there are only a couple of women. And there is research that say that they're splitting, that there'll be the good woman and the bad woman. It's not hard to be the good woman in her presence, okay? This is right. You're more likely, you're going to be the good woman, but that dynamic is very unhealthy, and you have to be aware of it. And I think part of what was happening there was a little bit of her concern about that, which I wasn't all that sensitive to. And the other thing is that people will over-identify with each other, and that's one of the things that she did do with me in one context. And the over-identification is when I'm going to switch to race, because you're women, because it's easier for me to tell it. So a black student who I did not know came to my office to tell me he was being discriminated against by one of my colleagues. These are complicated conversations. I'm sure you've all had your versions of this, right? And I thought, okay, you don't know me, but I got to tell you, I'm an officer of the university. If you make a complaint of discrimination, I must deal with it. He was horrified. I don't want you to. I said, there's not a choice. That's one way I'm different than you. I'm an officer of the university. The second thing is, as he began to tell me, the person who was discriminated against him was a professor, I thought it was, a professor whose children I am literally the legal guardian of. It was literally. So I said, I got some bad news for you. Now, the second thing, I think you're getting ready to tell me this name. We're still going to work through this together, but I need to tell you I'm the legal guardian of his children. And he may be discriminating against you. We can still allow for that, but I just got to tell you what the story is. This was a horrible situation, as you can imagine. But what he was doing was he was over-identifying with me. He assumed we were alike because we were black. Of course I'm going to know my colleagues better than I know him. I don't know him at all. Or the other thing that can happen is between women, particularly of different levels, you assume you're alike because she's the only other woman. And then you're not alike because she's more senior or she doesn't have children and you do or whatever it is. And then what you have to be careful of is that the person doesn't feel betrayed. You have to manage that over-identification, that over-differentiation, that betrayal, right? And people will say it was the woman who did me in. It's systemic, okay? So I think that just as you are building relationships here, but when you're in the minority, the dynamic, which is a systemic dynamic, is one that one needs to keep in mind that we're all impacted by because it's about how the brain categorizes and makes sense. And so in terms of these political dynamics, the catfighting that can happen between women, it's the women who don't get along, that's very comfortable for them to think it's the women who don't get along, right? And there is systemic pressure to have you not get along. So you need to get along anyway. Right. So thank you very much.